like to call the special meeting for Wednesday, December 4th at 6 o'clock p.m. to order. Can we have a roll call, please, Mrs. Schlueter?
Mr. Alexandrovich?
Here.
Mrs. Evans?
Here.
Mrs. Klein?
Here.
Mrs. Larson? Here. Mr. Nielsen?
Here.
I'm here, and Mrs. Witkowski.
Here. Thank you. Has the meeting been properly posted, Dr. Pats?
Yes.
Thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We're here today for board development, and the topic is board superintendent's roles and responsibilities. And Dr. Pats, did you want to start, or?
You can or I can, whichever you'd like to do.
I guess, first I would just like to say that when we speak about our topics, if we could just address the board as a whole, and when we speak about the superintendent, think about the superintendent as any superintendent we would have, not specifically Dr. Pats, when we're speaking about the board roles and responsibilities. We're not picking out individual board members or specifically Dr. Pats. It's not an evaluation. Dr. Pats?
Yeah, I think you want me to sort of kick on?
Sure.
Well, when we talked about this, number one, it's a good topic to have. I know about a year ago, Tim, you had mentioned it, that, we need to try to figure out where some lines of delineation are. And I think in my career, I've been to so many board and superintendent workshops, as have many of you have, that have talked about the issue is what is the board's responsibility, what is the superintendent's responsibility, and what happens when there's an overlap or whatever. And I've always believed that the way our state association, and if you recall, those of you who were on the board 2 years ago, I think it was 2 years ago, when John Ashley was here from the School Board Association, he addressed this issue, as did the school board members from Hamilton that were here, it was 3 years ago now. The board president, Gabe Galasari, he's now the CISA president, I think he's still the CISA president. But, and I think it's an important topic because it gives everybody maybe a comfort level, not to say that there won't be some issues, but I've always thought the best way to address starting off this kind of thing is for you as board members to commit to us, telling us what you believe is the role of the board. Because on every document, I think you can pick up online or otherwise, it says the role of the board is to create policy. Well, that's nice, but what exactly does that mean? And then it says the superintendent's job is day-to-day operations and management of the district. Okay, where do those cross, and what do we need to do, to make sure that we don't have any problems, I guess, and somebody doesn't get upset with it's not their job or so on and so forth. And it's important for me to know as a board how you feel about what your roles and responsibilities are, because I may have a different view than you do, and I think that's why we're here, because you may have a different view than I do too in terms of my roles and responsibilities. So when Janet and I talked about this, there are some things that I think that we may not have very clear guidelines on, and maybe some things that we're very clear guidelines on. I don't know. So with that, how would you like to go to the next step?
Oh, and then we discussed our goal.
Yeah. Go ahead.
The goal was, well, you had it written down the exact way we had it. Do you still have that?
I don't have it with me now.
Well, we just wanted to come to a mutual agreement between us, between these responsibilities.
Right, and we didn't necessarily think that the one document that you had gotten regarding the MECWAN policy, I guess you could call it, wasn't necessarily our goal. It was just,
Right.
That was a reference to be able for us just to have a better understanding. And maybe we can't reach all of that tonight. I mean, we could probably sit here for 4 or 5 days and take everything and say, well, whose responsibility is this? And we would still, have some discussion to do. But I think to Janet's point is just sort of try to come to some agreement that maybe we can live with for a while and that we address periodically as we move forward. So we don't have me saying, that's not the role of the board, and have you say that's, that we're going to do that because that's what we want to do, and then we get into areas that I don't think any of us want to get into. And so I hope our conversations tonight are honest and sincere and informative, but such that we can walk out and say, okay, now I get it, or now I don't get it, or I got to change, or somebody else got to change, or whatever it might be.
Considering that you and Janet were the two that had the planning meetings, I'll just throw out, you might want to lead how this should go.
Okay.
Or do you want to talk about the things that you talked about at your planning meetings that brought you to the conclusion we need to have a meeting? Because that seems to be the underlying current. There must have been some things that were going on that led us to, maybe we should have a meeting on this. And so I don't know if, how you two want to handle the moving forward part, but
That's a good point. We sat down, I don't know, it was a couple months ago, and just thought we should address this topic. And as we did that, we both gathered information, and we got online and took policies and whatever we could find out that might be relative to what we're talking about. And the ones that I gave you the other night were the most recent ones that we decided on Monday, that maybe we should give them just additional information. I would hope, and I think as you read all those, there's a lot of consistency amongst them. There are differences, but there's some consistency too. So when Janet and I were going through those, it was sort of funny, because when she would come across one and I would see she liked it, I look at mine and I liked the same thing. And I don't think we found too many. You know, this one right here was part of a larger policy, but we both seem to think that was a good reference point, at least as far as how we address things. Certainly, every board has its own personality and different dynamics, but I think there's fundamental things. There are fundamental things that I think all boards should be able to say, okay, here's how we operate, and here's the best way to do that. And if we have a conflict or an obstacle of some kind, here's how we can resolve it. So what we did is we took a look at a bunch of research articles, if you will, from different school districts, and said, where does this fit for us? And, you know, you looked at, well, I think you all have looked at it.
Yes.
If you looked at all of them, if you read them, as I said, there were some pretty, you know, consistent expectations. And so the one that I probably put more stock in than any of them, just because it got to the point, was the blue one. That's one that I had gotten probably 10 years ago. And I think parts of that come up in just about every conference, every national, last school board conference that we were at. I know this particular document, parts of it, I don't know if it was paraphrased or whatever, was part of that conversation too. So I think the thinking throughout the nation is sort of similar. And certainly there are, you know, thinking that's different as well. But I think when you talk about the board expectations and the superintendent's expectations and so on and so forth, when we looked at all these, we thought we just need to have that conversation for us. And you know, I think one of the things that I would like to be able to get to is when you read all of this, you know, what sort of stood out to you as it relates to us?
We did not talk about any specifics,
No.
any problems or anything. We only
Okay.
brought these items forward, so we did not talk about anything specific or any problems.
Right. We wanted this to be a dialogue for us that, you know, to be civil, to be respectful, and all those kinds of things. That's truly what we want.
And I just said we did not talk about any problems. We also did not talk about any strengths, and that is something we brought up. You know, what are our strengths? And I said problems, not just problems, but, you know, do we have issues? It doesn't have to be problems.
So I guess, you know, Jeff, unless you have another direction, I'd like to hear, you know, maybe we can start off with by just getting your viewpoints on any of the handouts that you had gotten, whether it be the Mequon sample policy that they operate by, or any of the other documents that you've gotten over time. In particular, Monday, you probably got 3 or 4 more that were new to you, but they're very easy reading. And like I said, I think if you read one, you probably could say, well, I read that already, and it makes a little more sense. Maybe we can just go around the board and see what your feelings were, and how you felt about it. Okay, sorry. Don't you sing too?
please no.
Anybody like to start?
I'll start, and maybe I'm going to go off on a little more of a tangent than the direction that you're looking for. But being new to the board, I struggle a little bit in the, what I'm going to call the political arena here. Because you talk about the board that has their responsibility and the administration has their responsibility. And I've always reported to somebody who's always been my boss, and whatever that person wanted, they got. There were lines in which he or she wanted me to work and give me direction as to what they wanted done, but I've worked for people who had me right underneath their thumb and wanted to know everything that was going on, and other people who never saw them. They just let me do my job. And here we're talking about with the delineation of responsibilities, kind of like the boss that just let me do my job, you know, get out of the way. We should be doing policy and vision here on the board, and you and all your people in the administrative area should be running everything. And every once in a while, I remember that the person who had me under their thumb, I may have learned more from them. They felt more comfortable, and it was the way that they worked. And so all of this is good, but we're all different, and we all have different ways of working with people, and we're going to step on one another's toes once in a while. And I don't think we're trying to be bad about it or hurt anybody or create problems, and we just can't take it personally. We have to understand that we're trying to do a job. But anyway, that's some of what I'm struggling with. I'm also authoritarian, and at work, what I want done, it better be done. So, again, I'm struggling, I'm trying to fit in, and I do not have any problems with somebody saying to me, you know, you ought to consider maybe doing it this way.
Thank you.
But I'm still going to be a pain in the neck.
At least you're honest about it.
I like a couple things that I read about the Pleasantville, the pink one. I like that the superintendent primary responsibility is to provide visionary and inspirational leadership that enables the district to improve the educational experiences of children. And I found something else online, that superintendents have a vision of good instruction and how to execute those programs that will improve the teaching and learning. And I appreciate that, and I wouldn't be able to do that. So I like seeing how that is working from the superintendent to the admin to teachers. So I like that part. I was trying to say something else, and I'm trying to remember how I was going to say it. I guess I feel that we shouldn't undermine. In most cases, you know better. Judy knows better, you know. Paulette knows better. So I think learning that too. I remember my first day when I sat and I went to everybody's office and met with them and, you know, all the admin, and just, it was so much information. I think I had about 10 pounds of paper and binders and things that I still resort to. And I think that we need to trust in the admin. So, but I also think that we need to be trusted and respected as well. So I think it's a two-way street. It's treat others as you want to be treated type of thing.
Good point.
So,
Thank you.
I'll just pick up on the trust. You know, I think that's a key, and it comes in all different flavors and all different areas. Because on this, the sheet you referenced, Steve, boards and management have different roles. Boards focus on strategic versus operational oversight. I think if there's one area that really gets grayed, it's that, you know, where they handle the operational side, we're more the strategic planning side. But I think it's real hard sometimes when we're trying to, especially when it comes maybe down to budget items or things like that, where it's natural for some of the things that we may be looking at or getting interested in, how that couldn't possibly affect anything other than the operational side. So that's where some of the animus might come in, was like, well, wait a minute, no, you guys are kind of getting into more of that side of things. So I think it's always going to be the gray area, but the more we can help define and delineate that, you know, I think the better off we are. And some of the times when questions get asked, I might be gaining understanding, and there may be times when, why am I continuing to get these questions? And I think that's where some of that might creep in. Well, why do they keep asking questions? Do they not trust what we're doing? Which isn't it, but I don't know how else to say that. You're nodding your head like you know what I'm talking about.
No, I agree with you. That bullet point jumped out at me, too. And I think that that is the trickiest part of it, because we need to have enough information to make those strategic decisions without interfering in the operations. So we need to know a lot of those operational things that are going on, but we don't necessarily act on them. And that's tricky. And there is going to be some overlap, like Dr. Pat said before. So I guess that's what we're here to try to hash out tonight. And the other thing that kind of jumped out at me was on this pink sheet, and it just, item number 1 was responsible for overseeing the finances of the district and overseeing in general, you know, how we're doing with student achievement and so forth. And I think, you know, we might want to have some conversations about what is an appropriate level of oversight and what you know, information do we need to make those kind of decisions and feel comfortable that things are being done the way that they should be done. And I don't know, I mean, sometimes I think in some situations you maybe require more information than others. And it's very individual also, I think, among each person on the board.
Thank you.
Well, I'm looking at a recent event with the curriculum discussion. That was one of the most in-depth discussions we've ever had on curriculum, but that was, I don't think those questions were wasted. It was really an important topic. But as people who represent the community and get elected by our peers, where are we okay to dive into that type of detail, and where are we like, okay, well, that's what the curriculum is set. I kind of looked at that as, if there's anything that a school board should be involved in, it's the curriculum of teaching the kids in our community. But that may not have been what everybody's takeaway was. Maybe they were like, well, maybe we shouldn't have gotten into that level of discussion. I mean, I don't know. Does that make sense?
I think that those kind of discussions are important to have, but I think, kind of going back to what Amy said, it's important to recognize that we're not the experts generally in any one of these areas. I mean, unless we happen to work professionally in that area. And we also weren't, you know, on the work committees that did all the research and everything for that, to solve that particular issue. So it's definitely a balancing act.
We are the policymaking body, and we're entrusted to make the policies for the administration and for you to implement. And one of the things that I highlighted when this was handed out, and you highlighted the same paragraph, was on this national affiliate, page 2 of 2, under the clarifying roles. It's got the little blue up in the right-hand corner, where it says boards that micromanage are working outside of their policymaking role, and superintendents who macromanage are superseding the governance role of the board. And we set the policy to give you the directives. And if the administration sometimes falls outside of the policies and steps outside of the policies and changes the rules before coming to the board asking that we make policy changes, I think that's where sometimes it can cause problems with the board and cause questions and make it appear that there are trust issues. And there might not be trust issues, but I think that's where it might cause some strain. Our policies are the directives, and I think it might not appear that we were micromanaging if policies were strictly followed, and if they were brought back and changed in a timely manner, we could always call a board meeting to change a policy. I just wanted to make that point. I mean, we do make the directives, so I just think that's an important point to make.
I have a question that I thought of while I was reading these. Is kind of our ultimate goal to create our own policy on the roles and responsibilities? Or are we just having?
For tonight, you mean?
Well,
Or in
maybe,
general?
we're not going to sit down probably and
Yeah.
write it all out tonight, but is that kind of where we're wanting to
Well,
head
you
to?
know, Jan and I talked about for tonight, just more or less having a goal. My personal opinion, I don't think you can write a policy for everything. I think a policy sometimes can restrict you, and then sometimes if you do something outside the policy, you try to, it goes to Janet's point, sometimes you may go within it, sometimes what you do may be outside of it, but it's interpreted one way or another, so, I don't know, I guess that's your prerogative as a board, whether you want a policy or not. To me, it's more, this is a practice. It should be a practice that we do everything, because you cannot write a policy that would legislate everything we do.
No,
And that-
I do agree with that, but I'm thinking, going forward too, say when we do get new board members and so forth, it might be helpful at
Yeah.
some point in time to just have some guidelines. And maybe we did already include that. It's been a while since I've
Maybe
looked at
that would
that.
be in the new board member handbook.
Yeah, well, that's what I meant. Is that what I maybe said something other than board member handbook, but that's what I was thinking. I was saying the wrong words. So, okay.
Because we don't have anything that lays this out. It just refers to state statute, and it doesn't
Okay.
give any guidelines.
In the
Right.
handbook, you mean?
Well, our handbook or our policy, we have no policy where, something that would be,
We have one generic one. Judy, where did we find that one? Where did you find
It's
that?
actually in the board code of conduct,
Oh.
which
Yeah, it-
references the one sentence with, relationship between the superintendent.
Okay, that's fine.
Debbie or Linda, any comments? Right now?
I don't have anything right now.
Okay.
Nothing in these sample documents to me jumped out as being anything that I strongly disagreed with. I think, like you mentioned, they mostly kind of say the same thing, just in different ways, and some may be a little more detailed than others. But in general, I was pretty much in agreement with them.
Is it okay if I comment on some of the?
Yeah.
You know, I think, number one, thank you for your comments, because I think when we have discussions like this, we need to be very candid and honest, and I appreciate you doing that, everybody. And I think as we go through this, as administrators, we always look at it, in that very simplistic sense that, and I think, Tim, you said it at one board meeting, we're at the 10,000-foot level, and here's where the managerial part takes place. And I guess that's how we operate, and Al, to your point, I think sometimes we like to believe, and whether it's right or wrong, I don't know, that maybe private sector is different than the school sector, because it is different. There are a lot of different things. But, the one thing that Janet just mentioned that I remember, I think it was a year or two ago, and I think it evolved, it was around a policy that really concerned me at the time, and now that it's brought up, I think it needs to be addressed, is that if you felt like we ever went outside of policy, we need to know that right now. I mean, that needs to be, hold of folks, or somebody contact me, and if it's somebody else, does it, because the one that I remember that stuck out with me was an administrative rule versus a policy, and the thing that was the kicker on that was the date. And because the date didn't coincide with the policy and the administrative rule, do y'all remember what I'm talking about? Oh, that's good. But that's what it was, and then we'll look it up. But I know it was mentioned that, we didn't follow policy or something like that. So I think that is critical for us, because you absolutely should be expecting us to 100% abide by policy. There's no question about that. And if we ever interpret that, part of you setting policy is, here's what we want done. And it's our job to say, okay, here's how we're gonna get that done. And I hope you as a board look at our district in terms of curriculum and everything, that we get results, and we get pretty good results. And I hope that's a sign that we're following policy as one particular point, but then I think all the work that gets done is another thing. But I think that's really critical to your point, Janet. If you even feel like we violated a policy, let's get it on the table right away and say, we think you overstepped your bounds here, Steve. And then if it was Jim who did it, I'd go see Jim and Of course, Jim would never do that, so I'd go see Judy then, and I know Judy would, so then it goes to Mike. But I think that's, because that's the kicker right there. Because if you feel like we've intentionally violated a policy, then we need to know about that, because we would, I think I can speak for all of us, that we would never do that intentionally, and if we did, there's something wrong, we should be held accountable for it. At the same time, we expect the board to tell us, here's the policies, here's the big picture. Make sure our kids are educated, make sure we have a great budget every year, make sure our facilities, all that kind of stuff. And that's what, in the end of the day, that's what I'm hoping that you as a board member can go out in the community and say, you can't argue with the way we do business here. Because, can we improve on things? Absolutely. We tell you that all the time. But nobody can argue with some of the results that we're getting. Of course, we always want to get better ones. So to that point, I think that's one, for me, that's huge. That's the biggest thing that was said tonight, is that if we're not doing something from a policy perspective, then we need to know about that. And to not know about that, I think it could be a problem, because I think we deserve that right, as would you deserve the right to know if we were going a different direction without you doing that. Tim had mentioned something that, what level of involvement, and I think that's one of those things that we, in time need to have discussions on, is what level of involvement, what does involvement mean? Does that mean asking a question? Does that mean asking for something? And does that mean each one of you does that, or do you mean to do it as a collective board? For us, it's much easier to operate is if we know that you as a collective board want something, as opposed to one board member or two board members or whatever it might be. And I'm not saying one board member or two board members shouldn't bring something up, but I think then the whole board should address it. That makes our jobs a lot easier, because then we don't have a sense of, well, so-and-so wants this and we don't know about that, and it makes it very unclear to us. And oftentimes it's not a policy issue. It's more of a request for information, that kind of thing. Because, just today I had an incident where I got an email from the police chief and said that some board members had contacted him regarding police liaison officer. And the first thing that came to my mind is, wait a minute, that should have never gone that way. That should have came to me first. And I would like to know, do you agree with that statement that I just made or not? Because it was about setting up a meeting, about addressing this. Unless you talk about that as a full board, I think that's an example of, that should be coming to me, especially since we addressed it at a board meeting less than a month ago, I believe. So do you understand what I'm saying? So I think that process, I think, helps me realize that, okay, the board is going to follow protocol, if you will, and we will too. But we have to know what you're expecting of us, and that makes it a little bit easier. Because I was caught totally off guard. I'd had the conversation with the police chief, and I had the conversation a number of times, and we addressed it here as the board. And from that, we were going to do a follow-up, and I had already talked to the high school people. So then when I get a thing from the police chief, that tells me that, okay, did I not do my job, or do you think I'm not doing my job, so you had to go do it for me? Because that was the perception that I got right away. I throw that out there as an example. Am I mad about it? No. I'm just simply saying that helps me recognize, that we need to talk about if we're going to do stuff. I'd love to have the whole board say, here's what we want you to investigate. I'll get out there and get it done. No problem. But if I'm getting it from different sources before it's even addressed with me, I don't think that's a good way to do business. So
I'd agree that that's a board level discussion. And we just had a discussion, and I guess dovetail off of that, if somebody at the board would want the board to look into something, that's something that should be approached to the board president,
Right.
and have the board president then, on behalf of the board,
Right.
discuss it with you.
That's my point.
Because that's referenced in here a couple of times too, about anything that needs to come up, run it through the board.
And I
Board
think for the most
president.
part, we do that. I just bring it up because it happened today. And I was just sitting there, and it struck me, especially with this meeting. I think it's an opportune time to bring it up and we can have a discussion about it. There's nothing, nobody's going to get all, mad about it, but I think it's one of those things that allows us to say, okay, how are we going to operate? Because then will I get somebody else come to me and say, by the way, I went on a scheduled meeting to talk about a new engineering program, and, well, where'd you hear about that? Where's that coming from? So the I don't know sometimes is worse than addressing. And I think that comes down to, as a collective board, what you tell us and the direction you give us when you're meeting here as a board meeting really helps us as far as administrators say, okay, now we know where to go and what we should do, how fast we should do it, and so on.
I think it makes the organization a lot more efficient too, because you're not, going in circles or doing opposite things that different board members want you to do. So I think it would help the efficiency of your organization.
There's a comment on the Pleasantville School District sheet, number, I guess 9 and 10, kind of looking at that together. 9's got this big, long paragraph, superintendent shall have the authority to organize, reorganize, arrange the administrative and supervisory staff, including with a limitation, instruction, and business affairs which, in his or her judgment, best serves the school district, comma, subject to the approval of the board. Well, with all due respect, how on earth are you going to go through all of that and then go to us and say, but we need you to vote on it? How
See,
can we vote any other way than go, okay?
But see, that's one of those things, Tim, that if you look at my job description, you know, and that's the way we've operated forever, is, you know, that's my decision. The employment of anybody other than myself is my responsibility, and the employment of
Right.
me is your responsibility.
Right.
And that's the way I've never been on a board that didn't operate that way, or a school system, and we've done that here too, and I think it's gone very well.
And I agree
That's
with
why
that.
we have human resources and so on.
So my point is, it comes to a board vote.
Yeah.
To have us approve what you did, when clearly we weren't involved in any of the meetings, we don't know any of the people. I mean, almost to have us.
contradicting
It's
itself.
contradicting, that's exactly my point. So that's where we even had the discussion when it was brought up last year, I think, about, or maybe it was 2 years now already, about how you want to rearrange some things. And we kind of said, well, you have the budget, as long as you work within the confines of the budget, and if this is the way that you best feel the staff needs to be arranged, then that's the way you need to be rearrange it. I don't want to be involved in those HR meetings.
Right.
So I guess, but that's,
Yeah.
But then why do, okay, maybe I'm wrong on this, but didn't we have information come to us that we vote that this person is approved to go to full-time or 8/10 of time and these other things?
Yeah.
Isn't that, why are we doing that if this number 9 is the way that we're saying that we should be operating?
Well, I mean, it's a formality.
Steve makes all those decisions. He determines he's going to hire somebody, let somebody go, move them from part-time to full-time, et cetera. Then why would that come to us?
If
I think it-
if I could answer that question, under state statute, the Board of Education has to approve any employee who works under a contract.
Oh.
So for the last several years, you've only approved those individuals working under contract. Years ago, there were more people listed, it was a more for your information situation, but particularly since we've been using board docs, you only approve those employees that are required to be approved by the board under state statute.
Thank you.
And part of that was also that usually those reports come at the time when we're approving staffing for the following year. So some of it involved layoff or reduction in their contract and so on.
Okay.
But there might be some boards that have a superintendent's contract that don't allow a superintendent.
Right?
Yeah.
and that would also be the time, if I understand this correctly, where we could have, as a board, a more of a policy type visionary discussion of, we're directing the administration to keep class sizes at 25 or less, or 24 or less. Well, now, with that board directive, now they'd have to work within the FTE confines of how you're going to juggle your, to your point, that's where we could come involved. I mean, I don't think we have.
Well, we have a policy already that states our class size, so.
We have a range.
Range,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, I'd like to add, though, something about number 9. You seem to think that subject to the approval of the board doesn't really add anything to that decision. When I think that, you're the expert and you are, organizing and making some decisions, but you would recommend, and based on good reasons that you would share with the board, we would agree with your reasoning and approve it. So I think there is some board, could be some board oversight or discussion on what it is you're deciding to do.
I think that's a good point, Linda, and I think there's two things I would break that down into two parts. I think if it was a new hire, we take care of that through the personnel hiring of a new person that would come in. I think when it involves reorganization, then I think it's appropriate for the board to say, okay, how are you reorganizing? Why are you doing this? And that kind of thing. We don't necessarily have a policy on that, but it certainly reflects that. And Pleasantville does a few things different than we do too, but I think our practice should be that if we're going to reorganize, that we bring it to you to say we're going to do this or this, which we've done in the last couple of years. And so I think that addresses what you're saying, but I think there's two different parts to that too. It's the hiring a new person, which we do have the board approve because it's a contract, correct?
When it's a contract,
When it's a
correct.
contract, right? And then the reorganization part, I mean, that could happen at any time, and it could happen with anybody. It couldn't be just administration, it could be a teacher. We might move a teacher from one particular area to another because they're certified, and, you know, that's just, I think, a prerogative or in a sort of a responsibility that we have to have, that we would do that, obviously, for very good reason, and we don't do it very often. I think you would have an expectation that if all of a sudden you found out this dynamic teacher we have is now teaching, chemistry teacher now teaching art, you know, you might want to say, we need to know about that, because you're probably going to hear about that from somebody in the community. You know, how can this nuclear physicist all of a sudden be teaching pottery, you know, that kind of thing. So I think that's a communication thing. I think that's important.
Yeah, Lynn, I didn't mean to imply that I didn't want that in there, but I don't know if that's what you meant or not, but it's just sometimes when there are things that are brought to our attention that we're like, okay, I know we need to approve it, but I don't know what kind of substantive conversation I can have about it, but I agree with you about letting us know and giving us reasons for doing what you're doing. But yeah, there's teachers that get moved around all the time, you know,
Building to building, grade levels, and so on.
and those aren't brought up in front of the board.
No.
That's just stuff where you're just moving the chess pieces.
Right.
And we have seen resumes of principal new hires, you know, and if somebody was glaringly not qualified or something, which I don't think would ever happen, Judy would never let that happen, but we would see that, and we would have the opportunity not to approve that.
Well, and I think that goes to, I think Amy and Tim both mentioned that trust factor is very important. And for example, when we hire a new person, let's say it's an administrator, you can be assured that we do background checks till we're blue in the face, because you can go to the first 3 levels and find out good things. You go to the 4th level and you find out the skeleton in the closet. And it's like, well, like we had the expulsion hearings. We have no happiness in bringing, we hate scheduling those things. They're the worst thing that we do. But when we get to that point where we have to do it, it's because we've just exhausted everything we have. And as a result of that one, the other night, matter of fact, there was a couple of board members asked some questions that is really a good question that I'm going to be addressing with the board in the near future about, you know, how far did that extend beyond one person, I guess is the best way I can put it right now. And Alan, you know what I'm talking about. And because I think the board, my goal is to not put you in a position where you get a question in the community and go, I don't know. Now, there will be times when you'll say you don't know, and you should know some things just off the top of your head, but there might be important things. It could be a legal issue, like, you know, you found out that some teacher got disciplined or whatever. It's wise for you as a board to know that, so the wrong person doesn't come up and confront you and put you in a position where, or tell you something one way or the other, to put you in a position where you don't know how to react, or you don't react, and then they take that as we're trying to hide something, because we don't want to do that either.
I think there might be this feeling that possibly the board might think, in general, we might not get some information because you might be trying to keep it from us. But perhaps you're just busy in your daily duties, and you might think we might not be interested in that, or you might think it just might not be necessary. But some of the little things are of interest to us. I think it's just it's just passing us by, because you have your daily duties, and there are little things like that would be important to us to know, but I don't think you realize it.
Well, and I think I'm glad you brought it up, because I think that's probably one of the skeletons in the closet, is that particular issue of requesting information and so on. And there again, I believe that the whole board should be telling us, here's the information we want. And then we give it to you because you directed us to do that. You know, we want more information on this or that or whatever it might be, and give us a chance to put an appropriate, information piece or communication piece together. Because, several years ago, people on the board mentioned, we just want to answer the question of what value does this have? There was a board member that says, whatever we do, what's the value of it? Okay, if you want something as a board, I assume that as a board, there's great value and, you know, that's important for us to know what that is.
I'm not even talking about, I'm talking about things that we might hear in the news or something that might have happened that we go, oh, I didn't know that, you know, that might be reported, that you just maybe don't have time and you don't think about. You know what I'm saying? And,
I think I do in part, and you're right, we're busy.
yeah, you are
know, we're-
busy.
At the same time, I welcome, if we miss the boat on a piece of information, anybody call me and say, did you hear this? Because a lot of times you'll hear something in the community before I do. You know, people, by the time it gets to me, I'm the last one to know about certain things, and not necessarily be intentional, that's just the way the flow is. And then we can address it as a board and put it out in some sort of communication.
I like the email updates you send out. I mean, a while ago, it was almost like every 3 or 4 days,
Yeah.
and I like those. Makes me feel a little more in the loop.
Okay. See, and there's
But
where I've been struggling, because I know you get them from elementary, I know you get them from the high school, I know you get them in athletics, and I'm thinking, okay, what am I gonna put in it you don't, other than construction stuff and legal and,
But some people don't have kids in the school anymore,
True.
so,
true. Good point.
but I like them, because it just makes me know that you know, and we know, and we're on the same page.
Yeah, that would be one thing to maybe cross-reference to make sure that, for those people on the board who don't have kids in the school, if an alert goes out regarding a school, does it only go out to those parents of the kids at that school? If an
It
alert
depends.
goes out for Pleasantville, am I gonna get it? Well, actually, I'm not at Robinwood anymore. But am I gonna get it? Otherwise, but as a board member, we should probably know about, there was something that happened in the district today.
Well, that's a good question, because we do alerts in individual buildings based on what the event might be. For example, at one of the buildings, we had some elderly people that were sitting on a bench every day by our kids during recess. We got a little nervous about that. Well, that led to a couple other incidents with the police involvement, and so those people need to know that. We try to make a judgment call. If we put that out to everybody, are we gonna create a sense of panic and everybody going, in this day and age especially, that there's a real problem? So we try to gauge that, do the best we can, and we work with the police department to say, and that one in particular was sort of calm, but at that same school, we found a 22 shell casing on a fence. We don't know where it came from, but you put something like that out to everybody, and all of a sudden, we've got bullets in our schools, because that's just the way it goes. So, but to answer your question, we do the individual and we do the district-wide ones. The district-wide ones, I'm pretty sure the board is on all those. I'll have to double-check, but I'm pretty sure if it's district-wide, it's pretty serious. But if it's building-wide, it's just, we wanted those parents to be aware of it. And it might be just a MRSA thing. Usually that would go district-wide, but maybe it's something a little different than that.
But even if it's building-wide, that would be something that, if we know people who have kids there, well, let's use your 22 casing as an example. If someone were to come up to one of us and go, hey, did you hear about that bullet they found by the fence at so-and-so?
Yeah,
To Janet's point, we go, no, didn't hear about that one.
yeah.
They may think that would percolate to the level of, really, the school board doesn't even know about that? Whereas you may not think, well, I'm not gonna get all these other people involved, but maybe, it's really easy to delete an email. And maybe something like that would be, rather be on more lists than less lists, just so we know. That'd be that much less you'd have to put out in an individual update, we just know we're getting it in the general updates.
Yeah, I agree. Because we've had a couple of false alarm fire alarms at the high school. One, I happened to be at Walgreens at the time, got a phone call, or actually I was in Walgreens, and a lady said, did you hear about the big fire at the high school? Well, seconds later, I got a phone call, the dust alarm caused the fire thing to go off. But, when you get 3, 4 fire trucks out in front of your high school, it gets people excited. And so that's probably all the more reason for you to know, so if something like that happens, you don't get a phone call or get run to on the street and say,
Right.
how bad was the fire? What fire?
Yeah.
Or fire.
And Megan has sent us emails about things like that before, major things. But I think you're just saying
Oh, I'm not
on a
saying
little bit
never.
smaller level, right?
Based on all the reading and so on, is there one thing that would stand out with any of you that, on the plus side and as well as the need for improvement side, that we should, lay on the table right now, that, it's, here's something from a duties and responsibilities, I'd like to see this, or, this is something I feel good about, or, I think we have to come out of here tonight with at least this has been helpful to me, but I think it's also a little bit of a starting point for us to just keep making things better.
mentioned on a number of occasions the information requests, and then just reading one of these again, it says, Pleasantville, number 41. Information requests to the administration must be vetted through the board president in order to maintain a reasonable balance of volume and content.
I got that one circled too.
So, I'm only bringing that up because you had brought up information requests before. I guess that's kind of goes back to my opening comment. Maybe we want to address some things where you and Janet feel need to be addressed. And that may be one that you feel needs to be addressed because it's been brought up a couple times. And I don't know if that's the way the board wants to go or what, but.
I guess I agree with Tim. I sort of feel like we're all skirting around things, and I kind of wish I had something more pointed to discuss.
Yeah.
You know, that's just my feeling. I could be wrong, but I just feel like we're all skirting the issue that we need to talk about. Because I feel like, to be perfectly honest, I feel like we've done this board superintendent expectations so many times that I kind of was, to be honest, disappointed to have this meeting again, because that's what it was to me, again. You know, so I feel like, I wish we could come to the issue, like Tim is saying, you know, what is the issue here? What brought about this? You know?
Well, I think it was, you know, I'll just lay it out there. I think it was brought up a little bit ago just in terms of information and content, and to the point you just made, Tim, on number 41. You know, we do get a lot of information requests, and we are busy, and it's never going to be our position to say no, or not even, you know, if we can at all help it, say not right now, because we feel we have that obligation to you as board members to do that. That's where I'm coming from. I think those kinds of requests should come from the entire board saying, here's what we want information on. And that would help us. And I think the timeliness of it is very, very important too. You know, if you come to us on, I know when Tim and Janet and I sat down a long time before last year's budget, we talked about when we could change the agenda, that we would try not to change anything until the Monday before the meeting. So that's 2.5 days roughly. And at that time, I brought up, can we have that same thing for requests of information? Because I think that's reasonable and appropriate for us to be able to react to that. But I think there's two parts to that. It's that request, which is, you know, the issue. But the other part is that, does the board all want that? And that goes to my question, is it valuable for everybody, or is it just valuable for somebody? And as a board, how do you want that addressed? If you tell us, here's what we expect, then I think we should have something that we all live with. And if not, then that's okay too.
I'll cite a specific example, and that was when we had the discussion on the pool.
On what?
On the pool.
Oh,
The first discussion we had, the first meeting we had on the pool. We all got an email, we all got a packet of information that had in there. Here's all your information. It's going to be an action item or a possible action item. And I sent out an email because there was no way I was going to be able to make a decision on what was given with what I had. So I sent out, but we just got it on that Monday. So I had no other choice but to put an email together that, you know, that night. And then, or actually it was maybe Tuesday, and they scrambled on the Wednesday. So I suppose I could not have, I could have chose not to put that out there, only to come to the meeting the next day and go, well, back to the drawing board, because we're not going to be able to do anything with this. And so I think we're always going to have that fine line where, okay, do I ask for this information to hopefully maybe make a decision that next day, or do I not ask for that information? We'll do it as a board discussion, but that could put the process back even further. And I don't think we're ever going to have a magical answer to that. So,
and that's a good example, and that came off the heels of me not doing a very good job with the concessions and the information and all that kind of stuff on that. And our intent, or that pool thing, was to give you, as a starting point, is that information coming on that first meeting, as we put possible board action, because there may have been, you know, consensus, say, yeah, this is sort of a no-brainer, let's go forward. And we didn't want to not have that on the agenda and be able to say, well, we didn't have it marked, so we can't do it. It was just the possibility of doing that. We've done that with a couple other items too, to say possible board action or whatever. And certainly if you have it on there, doesn't mean you have to do it. It just means that you could do it if it's on there. So, but your point is well taken, that came out late. That's a good example. What came out late, that didn't give you enough information to look at the agenda and say we need to make a decision.
Well, I didn't even have a price tag, so, right, I mean, that's why it was so. But I guess that would be an example of kind of what we're talking about. So now, you want to have a board consensus on what does the board want. Not everybody may have wanted that. Some people may have gotten and said, cool, we're getting a new pool, done. And other people may have gone, well, you know, so then, were we better off to wait to have the meeting or to send the email? So I guess,
I think, you know, for us, it's best if you tell us, like what you did, you know, I need more information on this before I can even consider making a decision. That way, if we can't get it to you, if that was a Monday, if we can't get it to you by Wednesday, that's all right, because that gives the board a chance to at least talk about, here's what other information that's coming to you, or we give it to the whole board that night together, and so they all get it at the same time. What you did allowed us to put some information out there pretty quickly after that, but before the meeting, but it was still not as timely as it could have been. But that shouldn't be confused with we were expecting a vote on the board, it was just that part of it was going forward until we had another meeting, because there were 2 meetings in that month that we were trying to get it done by the second meeting is what we were trying to do.
right.
One of the problems I see is finding out what the board wants, because we're all individuals, and unless somebody puts a motion out there and it comes to a vote, you don't know. I mean, we might all be thinking, and I'll use the pool as the example, we might all be thinking, yeah, the pool's a great idea, but Tim says, well, I don't have enough information, and as he's talking, I go, well, yeah, it would be nice to have more information, but had we put it to a vote, might have gone. But on that one, we did put it to a vote, and we wanted to wait till we heard about what's gonna happen with the money with the state. So,
I think that you bring up a great point, that if we're gonna do things like that, doing it through a motion process allows everybody to have a chance to say whether I want it or not.
yeah.
I think it's a good way to operate.
I think what that may allow or require, I guess, is the administration to understand that things may not move as fast as they want, because now we need to control the flow of information and consensus.
I agree.
You know, I think continue to do as much as we're doing in advance in email is great, but if we're talking about, okay, we need to have a board consensus before we're gonna disseminate information, that's gonna really hamper the movement of the board.
Yeah, because we can only do that in open session.
Exactly
We
right, so I don't
can't-
wanna,
We can't do that by email.
so I don't
Everybody send
wanna
an email.
go too far to the extreme either. What?
Everybody send your email.
No, but your point is taken from the standpoint that if we know the board's gonna operate like that all the time, then we know we better have our ducks in a row so that you have the information timely and as much information as you want, and know full well that if we come to you with an expectation that tonight you were supposed to vote on something, but you didn't have enough information to do it, that we can't get our feathers ruffled if you say no because we need more of this. But then it's because we're hearing from the whole board, go back and do this.
And I don't think we want to make things more difficult for each other, because that could be a real, well, you didn't get it to me in time, so now you're right back to, you know, unpleasantness on both parties. So I think within that parameter, we can probably work things out, but, I mean, those are the two extremes, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. Other comments by anybody on our topic of the night? You know, I think.
That's not my topic of the night. That's your 2 topics of the night. I think if you need information to make your vote, you have a right to ask the information. You have a right to ask the questions to make your vote.
I don't think that's what's at the heart of the discussion. I think it's the timeliness of you finding out that information. I think Tim gave a really good example. We got the information late, and he asked for more information. I think that was completely a legitimate thing to do. I think, though, that the other thing that we're sort of referencing is when we have a decision to make, and then, you know, at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Wednesday, and the meeting is Wednesday, 6 o'clock, all of a sudden, 8 questions come out. I think that's what we're talking about. I think that can be a problem, and,
Understand?
you know, I think we've seen that, and I think maybe that's something we should address.
But
We can-
questions or getting the answers to
Just like 8 questions at 2 o'clock in the afternoon when your meeting is at 6 o'clock, you know, that can be a problem. I mean, because like we've all said, all the directors and Steve, everyone's got a lot of things to do. And then if you're doing your job and all of a sudden you get these 8 questions now that you need to research at 2 o'clock and the meeting's at 6 o'clock, and then we've all said, hey, we want the information ahead of time, you can't compile all that information ahead of time,
And
Well, I think that the nature of the questions, though, aren't research questions. They're just questions that I'm assuming, or general knowledge that would be because of the work that was done in advance, because of the information that was compiled, the answers would be known.
That's
It's
not
not
always the case,
intended to
though.
be a research question.
But Linda, to be honest, that's not the way it works. We're busy, and every question, no matter what it is, takes time to make a response. And my point is that I think it's more beneficial for board operations and relationships and all that other kind of thing, if there's questions that are coming our way, decide on a board what kind of information you want. Certainly, you can call and ask a question, I'm not talking about that. But I think when questions come forward, it takes time. And I think when we give them, I can't, is there a reason why we couldn't get those questions on a Monday as opposed to a Wednesday?
You can get the questions at the meeting. And I think that's what I think we agreed right now that that's what you prefer.
And that's fine.
So that is the issue, I guess, that you don't like questions.
It's not that we don't want questions, that's
Oh,
not the issue.
Nobody said that. Nobody said that.
It's the timeliness of the questions and the relevance to them, and does the whole board want that information? We're trying to get a handle on, as a board, do you want to direct us to get information, or are we supposed to react individually? And certainly there's individual stuff, I'm not saying we don't want those, but, when it's consistently coming in late, and we don't have the opportunity to get that, and all of you should be getting responses. If Tim asks a question, I believe the whole board should get a response to that question. That's just the way it should be, a protocol. And we may not have time to give you the answers to the questions that somebody may ask if we give them later. And somebody might say, I never thought about that. If I'd have known that ahead of time, that would have triggered this question. And so on. So I think it's just out of respect for everybody's role and responsibility, and for communication and respect for the board to be all well informed.
So if you get questions late and don't have time to respond to them, would we be in agreement that it's fine to come to the meeting and say, I couldn't get you those answers to that question, or to those questions? And then actually the issue gets postponed to the next meeting. And see, that's what I think is another issue that would creep up, is that we're not making progress. We're just always bogged down in trying to get decisions from the board. So it's not convenient to get the questions late, but sometimes the issues don't come out that early. And
I think there are times when that's very.
it's a give and take.
Yeah. But I think for the most part, the questions that we're referring to, they could come on a Monday possibly, and we could get information out, or at least have time to do that. And because they may affect an agenda item or a piece of information or whatever it might be. And that's what I was talking earlier. What is the value of the question? How important, for example, if, Debbie asks a question, the first thing I think of is, why does she want to know that question? Because I think I should be thinking like that, because it's sort of analyzing, there's a reason for that. If she asks, how deep is the swimming pool, I better be thinking about, why is she asking that? Is she thinking about the safety issue? I better address that. Is she thinking about the cost that we're going to do for the renovation? I better think about that in my response. So it's more than just getting a question and saying, here's an answer. I think you should expect more than just an answer.
Janet, could I make a comment?
Sure.
I think, too, I think where some of the disconnect comes is sometimes the questions appear to question the work, and when, like, the teachers come forward, they are put through a very rigorous process, so they assume, and this is no fault of anybody's, and I think it's an assumption we all make, they assume you honor the process, so the result that they're bringing forward is going to be acceptable because the process is honored, and because they know they can't bring something to us until the process is honored. And I think in all of our cases, we have very, very rigorous process we follow before we bring anything before you. So, and not that we're saying you have to, like, I completely expected questions about the shift with economics. It was different, it was unique, you had to understand it, you had to be able to speak to the community, you had to, and I'm not speaking to that, but I think in general, everything is vetted through a very strategic process that we've designed. So sometimes when we get questions, I think what goes through, and I'll speak for myself, my mind is, it's all gone through that process, which is so rigorous. Why is that question necessary? So that's kind of what you're wondering when we say we don't want questions. It's not that at all. It's just, and the give and take, and Steve says this often, they don't want to hear your processes over and over again. Wendy, they know those, and I honor that. That's a lot of time for you to do that, but that's where I think the disconnect comes from sometimes, is we think that the process allows, or answers those questions that you're asking, if that makes any sense to you.
Well, let me, since we're talking about my questions, and I thought about my questions, I went back and looked at the 8 questions. There were probably more, Debbie, just for
I wasn't
Because you didn't see
pointing
it, but I don't know how you knew there were 8, but it's interesting.
I don't
So,
even know what 8 questions
anyway,
you're talking about. I
the
just picked out
questions-
8 out of the top of my head. I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, generally,
I'd like to keep this not personal, so let's.
okay, but generally speaking, when I'm looking at something you're bringing to me, new classes, I'm wondering, or my questions are, well, is this different than what we had before? And why these, are these the only ones that were considered, or some not considered, and why weren't they considered? Is there anything new here that we haven't been doing before? The fees were different, but you didn't tell us they were new. You didn't tell us what was different. So I had to,
And I'm not
Had to
referring
discover that.
to that situation. I'm just saying in general, I think when the questions come forward, we have a very succinct process for all the work we do. So I think, I'm trying to clarify why there might be a disconnect of why you're thinking we don't like questions, that's not the case. I'm just saying, in my mind, I'm filtering it through the major process. And I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I mean, I'm not telling you it's good or bad. I'm just saying, I think that's where my mind goes. I filtered it through the process, and you're assuming that's my point of reference. It's not your point of reference. And that's where you have to come to, I think we have to be cognizant of that in all respects. Our point of reference is different, and that's why there's different questions or different reactions to the questions. And that doesn't say you shouldn't ask them, or they're not good, or they're not bad, but you have to kind of go to that person's point of reference so you understand where they're coming from.
so does it make sense? As a board member, you're asking me to approve these new classes. You're not asking me to approve your process or to honor your process. You're asking me to say, these classes are what we're going to teach next year. And my question would be, are they new? Are they different? Do we discontinue
I'm
some?
not questioning any
And
of those. I'm just trying to explain.
And I'm just trying to
how the-
explain, generally, my questions are around those same basic questions. Is this new? Is there something different here? Does it impact any current policies that we have? And those are just those general questions. My questions all fall under those broad areas.
Well, but that may be true of the last meeting in the curriculum, but this goes back quite a ways where a lot of your questions don't meet that criteria, to be honest with you.
Well, you can make that general statement, but without anything, particularly in front of us, that's your recollection and my recollection, that's,
Right.
I guess the board gets copies of those.
And we expect questions because you can write a report a million different ways, and you're not going to meet everyone's needs. So you have to clarify. There's, you have to clarify those questions. I'm not saying that all I was trying to make a point is, all the work goes through a process, and when we bring it forward, we've worked through that process, but that doesn't mean that's where you're coming from. It's a whole different point. I'm not pointing it at you, Linda. It's a statement in general. So you're thinking I'm pointing at you, but I'm just saying in general, that's my filter. So that's what I'm thinking, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong, but that's, I think, where we're at. It's the detail that goes into our work. But you're not there and you don't live that, and we understand and know that. I'm not saying
I
it's
think too
one
often we deal
individual
with
person.
symptoms instead of cause. All we're asking for is board should be privy, or at least be asking that question, to Alan's point. If we want questions on the curriculum, or if it's on the pool, or whatever it might be, the whole board should be directing us to do that, I think. And, to number 41, if that's directed to the board president myself, that gives much more unification to the whole process, I think.
I'd just like to say, regarding the thought process, Dr. Dezert, it would be like approving textbooks. A lot of thought is put into writing a textbook, but the state entrusts us to approve textbooks, just like the curriculum. I think, no.
I shouldn't have brought it up, because all I was doing is trying to say.
that's okay.
Everyone's point of reference is
I'm just
different.
saying,
It
we're
wasn't
entrusted
meant
to approve the curriculum and the textbook, and there might be questions about it, and I just don't think we should overthink it. It's just, and I think if the agenda and the board packet comes out early enough on Thursday, and you can, look it over and get your questions. If you want the questions emailed ahead of time, and you can do it, it would be thoughtful to do it. Otherwise, if they have to be asked at the board meeting, I think they should be asked at the board meeting, and if you can't answer them at the board meeting, then we may have to suspend voting on it to another meeting so you can make your decision. I mean, I agree, it would be nice to ask you questions sooner if you can, all of us if we can, but I think if we need to ask questions to make a vote, we need to do it.
I think you had a good example, Janet, with the textbooks. We're not buying them anymore, but when we did buy textbooks, there would be we would have vendors in here, we'd be going through them and so on and so forth. A board member would not have any working knowledge of what's in any of those textbooks. And they pick them up and read through it, but then you wouldn't have the comparison or the discussion and so on. So even though the state law says board will approve, okay, that's a formality in my opinion, because you have nothing to base that approval on other than information you get from Wendy or Mike or whoever. But I think it goes to the point, I hope that I'm reading into this a little bit, there's where as a board, collectively, you say, if we're approving textbooks, here's the kind of things I want to know. Why did you choose the textbook you chose? What's different? And those fundamental things so that the whole board, so that we collectively know before we even do that the next year, and this is a textbook example, it could fit anything. Next year, we will know that if we're going to bring textbooks before the board, these are 5 questions the board expects us to be able to know. And if it's the cost, if it's the impact, if it's changing policy on sex ed, those kinds of things, that helps us. But to me, that should come from the whole board, and that should be the whole piece of information the whole board gets.
It's also what the community would want
Exactly.
us to have in our textbooks
Exactly.
and our curriculum. So, I mean, we are voting for our community and their children, so that's why we ask some of the questions we ask.
And like Wendy said, we're not opposed to the questions, it's more of the timeliness and the whole board wanting that same piece of information, or pieces of information. Part of it is courtesy, part of it is respect for time, part of it is the knowledge that the whole board is aware of it. I mean, all for one for all should be the.
We vote individually.
I know, but I'm talking about getting information. I'm talking about how you vote, I'm talking about information.
So you're suggesting if we had a common framework of information, such as we want a cost on every decision item that comes before us, we want to know what's different from what you may have had before, we want to know what's new, and maybe,
We tried that, and we created a form, and then we were told not to use the form. So I don't think you can systemize it like that, because it doesn't meet all the purposes.
That's the point.
Yeah.
Does Linda want that, or does the whole board want that?
I'm throwing it out there right now.
And that's what I'm trying to get at too, is that if there's information that's requested, and I'm not talking about just calling, if you have a question on a particular item, I'm talking about some of the bigger pieces of paper. Where as a board, if you come together and say, here's some of the things that we want to know about, or that should be included in the pool. Make sure we know the price, make sure we know who the vendor's gonna be, make sure we know what the bids were, whatever it might be. And that kind of thing.
I ain't going there.
But I think, I don't think that we resolve that sitting here tonight. I think that's something that we do by practice over time, by communicating with each other, by being, considerate of each other's needs and time and so on and so forth. And I think those kinds of, I don't think you can write a policy that we want this, this, and this, and we're
Right.
gonna do this. The world doesn't work that way,
I think what may be difficult to do when you're so immersed in the things you are before they come to the board is if you're able to take a step in our shoes and go, now, okay, now how are they possibly going to be able to make a decision about this? What do I need to make sure they know so they can make a decision on this? Because I think there may be some things in the process that she's talking about, that, when he's talking about, that we may not know about.
Sure. I agree.
Without going through a whole educational session here, I'm actually trying to make sure that I know the process. And so there may be some things that may be taken for granted on the administration side, so when we step into the room, you think we know, that we might not know. And I guarantee you, there's some members on this board that know more about the process. You've been involved in a lot more of those discussions than I have. She's more up to speed on things than what I am. So there may be more questions that need to be asked for me to get to where Melissa is, to be able to make the same informed decision that she can make just walking in the door.
And I
So-
think, to Alan's point and to several of your points, based on that we have, on the agenda, we have upcoming agenda items. To me, that's the perfect time for you as a board to say, if you see the pool on there, or whatever it might be, to, as a board, say, here are some of the things that we want to make sure we include on that piece. That gives us at least, and that doesn't necessarily take a motion, but that could give us at least an idea when we're prepping stuff. Now we've got, a couple of weeks to do that in many cases. And that's a big help for us. It's not
Not a
going to
bad
happen all
idea.
the time, and there'll be something that'll fall through the cracks, but it is helpful.
I like the other people's questions ahead of time. Like, a couple of people have said questions, and I never even thought of that. And that gets me thinking, like you had said, it gets me to a different thought process to think of other things that I probably wouldn't have thought of initially. So,
I was thinking the same thing. I read those questions, I go, how did they think of that? I never even considered that.
The benefit of group dynamic.
Yes.
That's absolutely. So which I think, I'm hearing, we don't want to, it's not, you guys don't want the questions, you just want them
in a timely
timely.
manner.
And we don't want to come into a board meeting, because there's people that watch our meetings, and I don't want people out in our committee looking at board meetings and having the board ask a question, and us sitting here saying, I don't know. To me, that's not acceptable.
I might take
2
exception to
points.
that,
2 points.
because you're not always going to have the answer. And I think that's where some of the frustration came in the past, too, where questions would get answered, and then the person to whom the question is asked would think they're being put on the spot, when that may not be the board member's intent at all. And it's, I was, use my own example, trying to be very careful and respectful and whatever, when we're having that curriculum discussion, because I didn't know how best to ask the question, because I certainly didn't want it to come across as either mean-spirited or condescending or anything like that. It was inquisitive. And so I think it's okay sometimes to go, you know what, I don't know. I don't have that answer.
I find a good rule of thumb when asking questions, making comments. May not be something I live by as well as I should, but don't make the other person wrong. Nobody likes to be wrong. So when you're asking a question, well, why did you do that on the curriculum? There's a way of asking it where you don't feel like, I think you're wrong in what you did. Yeah, attacked or
We
wrong.
said, it's not what you say, it's
It's how you say it.
Yeah, that's an excellent point.
Good point.
I read one the other day that said, discuss as if you're being videotaped, but I think about that quite frequently.
You ever watch back those videos?
I try,
It's hard
I'm
to
afraid-
think
yeah.
and listen and be on the spot all at the same time. It is challenging.
should be handing Red Bulls out as we walk in.
Oh, no. I'm bad enough when I'm sleepy. Don't get me wired.
I think sometimes when potential issues arise, it might just be helpful to take a step back and say, is this strategic or is this operational? To me, that's really the gist of it, and Tim, you brought it up at the very beginning. I can't remember how it was phrased, but, and this one brings it up too, only the board's principal The board's focus on strategic versus operational insight. And then, the next bullet point too, actually, the buck stops with the board, but the key to success is management. You know, we're kind of ultimately responsible, but you guys are the ones that get everything done. You know, you do all the work, and we have to have, you know, we're responsible for that work. So obviously, we are passionate and we take it seriously, but I think we also have to have faith that we've got the right people on the team and that you guys are competent and you can do your jobs. And if, heaven forbid, somebody ever didn't, you know, we would know that right away. So, I think it's just, you know, just kind of keeping that in the back of our minds. And I think if at any time during a meeting, if we feel like we're kind of getting too much into one territory or the other, you know, any one of us should be able to say, is this an operational issue or is this a strategic issue? And, you know, maybe then take a step back. It might de-escalate any kind of potential situation coming up.
I'd like just to underscore the avoid surprises. In here again on this Pleasantville, I think that's kind of a big, broad area, but the best we can do that from both sides.
Yes.
Phone calls that you don't want to get, we come into a meeting and go, oh, I thought this was going to be about this, and it's about that. Well, what's, you know, so, and we've both been in both situations, so I think the more we can do to avoid that.
Right. And we're not gonna be perfect either,
No.
you know? We're all gonna make mistakes occasionally, and, you know, hindsight, you know, is 20/20, but I think that it's important to recognize that if somebody does make a mistake, that they don't necessarily have an ill intent behind that. It's probably just an accident.
No, and I think, quite honestly, I think that's part of, you know, some of the issues we get into, and I think to Alan's point that, you know, just, I don't know how you say, don't make somebody, what did you say?
Wrong.
Don't make them wrong.
Don't make them wrong. You know, we all want to be right, and we never want to be wrong. And, you know, we look at it, you know, administratively, that, you know, we got a pretty good district here, you know, and sometimes you get on this thing, you know, why are they questioning that? And it goes exactly to your point. Well, is it because we're not doing it right, or we're being questioned, or they don't trust us, or whatever it is? And we have to step back, I think, on times and be able to say, you know, it's just, they want that piece of information, which I think goes back to so many of the things we already said. Then let's get the information requests out early, let's get them out to the whole board, let's find out exactly what you want a month ahead of time if it's on the agenda, knowing to your last point that you can't solve everything. Everything will not fit in a mold. You just can't do it.
Is there any other topic? Or did we want to think about creating a policy or just,
I guess, you know, I looked at tonight as an opportunity for us to talk about some of the things we did. Maybe there's more to talk about, I don't know, but I think it gave me a little bit more insight into some of the feelings that some of you've had. And, you know, and I think you maybe had a chance to hear from my side of the story a little bit. But I think we pick away at this, you know, piece by piece to try to have that organizational relationship that says, you know, we're all in this for the same reason. But to Alan's point of not making anybody mad, to being respectful of time, to get good information, to getting enough information, I mean, that's all something we can
Help us
speak for myself.
understand.
That's something I can work at, and hopefully we all look at that as something we can all do.
There's something I read online that said sometimes boards act as dysfunctional because of just their different personalities and their different agendas. Everybody's elected having a different agenda in mind,
Yeah,
and that needs to be remembered too.
yeah.
You know, some people have, you know, think of it have the specific agenda that they really want to achieve.
Yeah.
Safety, curriculum, whatever. And then, you know, mine could be one and Debbie's is completely different, but you have to respect that in everybody, that not everybody's going to think the same way you do. And I think that's something I struggle with the board, that everybody is so different, but, and not everybody's willing to listen and take what you have to say. So,
Do I understand it correctly that there is not something in the new member handbook that addresses the board and the superintendent responsibilities and roles? Is that what you're saying, Debbie? It's not in there?
I honestly don't
No,
remember.
that
I
handbook
don't
is just
know.
mainly for an operational, here's what happens is becoming a new board member.
And there's no policy either, that's why I first mentioned this. I thought maybe we needed a policy.
Well,
Or
I'm
maybe
just
we
thinking
should-
from a new member standpoint, it may not be a bad idea just to have something in there that says, here's the board's role, here's you as a board member, your role, and here's the superintendent's role.
It has a section of superintendent responsibilities, not necessarily the role, if that's your, but it says
Okay.
responsibilities.
Okay.
But that's a good point. When we get to the point where we have to review that every year, that should be one of the things that's. brought up by
It
the
may be
board.
something worth, yeah. And it doesn't have to be 5 pages. I mean, it doesn't have to be as pithy as 2 paragraphs either. Maybe a little bit more meat in it, but
We have board authority and responsibility.
Okay, so there is something.
There's a little, yeah, it's a introductory couple
I thought I
paragraphs.
remember something in there a little bit, but it wasn't quite as spelled out as the spec one policy, but.
It says the Board of Education functions not as management responsible for the day-to-day, but as a board of directors responsible for establishing a vision of Franklin Schools and monitoring its progress to reach that vision.
And that's pretty much what some of these policies say.
Pretty consistent with
I
all
mean,
these,
yeah,
yeah.
that's pretty much, you know.
I mean,
What we've read
there may
so
be
far.
this, add the board's focus on strategic versus operational oversight, just some bullet points like that that we may want to think about when we do review it next time, but I don't think it's something that has to be a total big rework. Most of it's in there.
Actually, what Amy read was that the board sets a vision, but most of these things talk about a board setting policies, not a vision. That the vision really comes, from what I was seeing, more from the superintendent. Because you're in the trenches, and I've said this to you before, you've forgotten more about education than I'll ever know. And for me to work at setting a vision, I'm not going to have as good a vision as you could possibly set. And then we have to support you in that vision
Well, and I think
with
that's.
policies.
Sure. And I think that's one of those discussions, I mean, it's a side topic, but that's why you have board retreats to talk about those kinds of things. And that helps you set a foundation for operating and identifying roles and responsibilities, I think. Maybe we could look at, after the holidays, I don't know if we want to make it an agenda item or if what you want to do with it, but it might be, sometimes you just got to let things simmer a little bit and see if our practices improve and those kinds of things. Maybe that's something we need to give a chance, instead of feeling like we have to write a policy or some guidelines or protocols or whatever they're called. So, I think that might.
I think if we had a policy, we could get really bogged down with it, though. You know, I mean, let's just say you sent an email late, and then is that up to Janet now to say, hey, you stepped off the policy? Or, and then another person sends an email, hey, you stepped off. I mean, we could just get bogged down with that just little tedious stuff, too. So a policy may not be the best fix.
But I do want to encourage the board, if you feel like, to Janet's point, if we've stepped over our bounds in terms of doing something about policy, we need to know about that. Because the one I vividly remember is the one I mentioned, and that, I know for a fact that was just a date issue, but it appeared to anybody that would pick it up to say that, well, the administrators changed this because the policy says this, and what it was a date issue. I wish one of you other guys had a memory, because I do. I'm gonna find it, though. And that's just important, and sometimes it's nothing more than, a phone call, I think you might have crossed the line here. Then it's a chance for us to revisit, because, it's hopefully like you deal with kids, our own kids, they screw up, better not let it happen again, or here's what you did wrong, or whatever, but you don't throw the hangman's noose over them right away and send them to somebody else's family, you give them a chance. So we just need to know if we're not going the right direction.
If there's no more discussion then, do I hear a motion to adjourn?
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mrs. Klein, is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mrs. Schluter. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned at 7:24.